This is a true story, and you won't believe it. I've never been one for superstitions or small town legends, but that Halloween night changed everything for me. It all started in late October when I returned to my hometown, a quiet place hidden in the woods. Everyone knows each other here, and while local legends get shared, no one really takes them seriously until it's too late. One legend stood out, whispered around Halloween: the Pumpkin Man. According to the older folks, he was either a ghost or a demon who appeared only on Halloween night. They said if you carved a pumpkin after midnight, you'd summon him. He looked like a scarecrow with a rotting pumpkin for a head. Once he locked onto you, he wouldn't stop until he got you. We all laughed it off. It was just something the older people used to scare us. But a few days before Halloween, the town buzzed with decorations. The air turned chilly, leaves turned brown, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. My friends and I were excited about Halloween, looking forward to parties and trick-or-treating. One night, we gathered around a bonfire at Jamie's house. The warmth of the fire felt great against the chilly air. As we roasted marshmallows and shared stories, someone mentioned the Pumpkin Man. Jamie chuckled and said how silly it all was. "Who's up for carving a pumpkin at midnight this year?" He grinned, and we all laughed. It was just a joke, but the idea began to grow. That night, we dared each other to do silly things. The group was small, just me, Jamie, Tara, and Chris, but we were all in. We made a pact, half serious, to meet at the old cemetery to carve our pumpkins at midnight. It felt thrilling, like we were part of something bigger, connected to the spooky legends of our town. Halloween night came faster than expected. By 11:30, we were hanging out in the mostly empty town square. The air was sharp, colder than it had been in weeks. We waited until most people went home, then began our little ritual. We found a spot just outside the square, near the old cemetery. It felt like the perfect place for a prank. Tara brought the pumpkins, and we sat on the cold grass, carving away with a dull knife we had snuck from Jamie's kitchen. We pretended to take it seriously, trying to make the silliest faces possible. Chris made a crazy, toothy grin. Tara's looked like a strange blob, but Jamie's was the creepiest. He swore he wasn't even trying. As we carved, we joked and laughed, but the air felt different, almost electric. When midnight struck, we stood there for a moment, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The town was silent, just the wind rustling through the trees. We snapped a few pictures, laughed again, and went our separate ways. I don't even remember when I got home, just that I went to bed, the whole night fading into the background of a typical teenage adventure. But the next morning felt strange. I woke up feeling like I wasn't alone. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the spooky stories from the night before. When I went downstairs, I froze. On my front porch sat a pumpkin. At first, it looked ordinary, but as I got closer, my stomach twisted. It was one of the pumpkins we carved that night. The face I made, the silly lopsided eyes and jagged mouth stared back at me. But it looked different now. The cuts were too smooth, and the face seemed almost alive. I stepped back, my mind racing. Maybe it was a prank by Jamie or Chris. I grabbed my phone and texted Jamie, but he didn't reply. Feeling uneasy, I rushed over to Jamie's house. His mom opened the door, worry in her eyes. She told me he hadn't come home, saying he was probably out with friends, but her voice wavered like she was trying to convince herself. I left with a sinking feeling something was off. Next, I called Tara. When she picked up, her voice shook. "There's a pumpkin on my porch," she said. "I think it's the one I carved." My heart raced as I rushed to her house, and sure enough, there it was. But this time, the face was twisted into a horrifying version of her carving, almost human, but not quite, more like flesh than pumpkin. After leaving Tara's, we decided to go to Chris's place, but he wasn't home either. His mom hadn't seen him since the night before. Panic set in. 2 of our friends were missing, and those disturbing pumpkins sat on our porches like warnings. We spent the rest of the day trying to contact them, but we heard nothing. As night fell, the town felt different, darker, colder. I sensed something watching me, though I couldn't explain why. That night, I couldn't sleep. The feeling that something was wrong hung in the air. Around 3 o'clock, I heard a noise outside my window. I didn't want to look, but something pulled me. Slowly, I pulled back the curtain, and in my yard stood a figure. It was tall and hunched over, with a massive, rotting pumpkin for a head. It wasn't a man, nothing human about it. Its body was thin like a scarecrow, with long, twisted limbs. The hollowed-out pumpkin head had glowing eyes locked on me. I froze, unable to breathe or move. After what felt like forever, it slowly raised one of its grotesque arms, holding my pumpkin, the one I had carved. The face twisted, alive and grinning menacingly. I slammed the curtain shut and backed away, my heart racing. For hours, I waited, but the house stayed quiet. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I passed out. The next morning, I found another pumpkin on my porch. This one wasn't carved, it was untouched. But I knew what it meant. Jamie and Chris were gone. The police got involved, of course, but they found no trace of them. They assumed they had run away. Tara and I knew better. We tried to tell people, but no one believed us. Why would they? It was just a silly Halloween story. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. The Pumpkin Man is real, and he's still out there, waiting for the next group of fools to summon him. The events of that Halloween changed me forever. I spent weeks wondering about Jamie and Chris, replaying that night over and over in my head. It felt like the town had been covered in a heavy fog, the air thick with secrets no one wanted to discuss. Tara and I felt like we were carrying the weight of the truth, but no one would listen. I remember walking through town, seeing pumpkins everywhere, but they didn't bring joy like they used to. Instead, they felt like reminders of what happened that night. I tried to enjoy Halloween, but every laugh felt forced, and every decoration felt wrong. The excitement of parties and costumes faded into an underlying fear I couldn't shake off. As Halloween approached the next year, I felt the tension in town build. Whispers about the Pumpkin Man resurfaced, and the air felt electric with anticipation. I wanted to confront the fear that had settled into my bones. With Tara, I decided to visit the old cemetery again, determined to put an end to the legend. We made our way to the cemetery under the moonlight, armed with flashlights and courage. The air was colder, and a heavy silence surrounded us as we approached the spot where we had carved pumpkins the year before. The ground felt alive underfoot. "I can't believe we're doing this," Tara whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "We need to face this," I replied. "We can't let fear control us anymore." As we reached the clearing, we noticed something strange. The grass was flattened, and in the center lay 2 pumpkins, identical to the ones we carved. My heart sank. They were untouched, just sitting there, but I knew better than to think they were harmless. "Should we?" Tara asked, her eyes wide with fear. "Yeah, let's carve them. Let's show him we're not afraid," I said, trying to sound brave. We took out our knives and started carving, recreating the faces from that night a year ago. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves as if the trees were whispering secrets. It felt like we were being watched. With each cut, I felt empowered. We were taking control of our fear, showing the Pumpkin Man we wouldn't let him haunt us anymore. But as we finished, the atmosphere shifted. The wind died down, and an eerie stillness settled around us. Suddenly, we heard a low growl, like thunder rumbling in the distance. Our hearts raced, and we turned to see a shadow moving among the trees. Panic set in as the figure emerged tall, hunched, with a rotting pumpkin head, just like I had seen before. I grabbed Tara's arm, and we stumbled back, trying to escape. The pumpkin man didn't chase us. Instead, he just stood there, holding the pumpkins we had carved, grinning like he had won. It was then that I realized we had invited him back. We ran out of the cemetery, hearts pounding, but the image of the pumpkin man stayed with us. No one believed us, and we were too terrified to speak of it again. Halloween passed, but the legend grew, spreading like wildfire through our town. To this day, I still see pumpkins on porches, their faces grinning mischievously in the autumn moonlight. I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me. I know that the pumpkin man is real and that he's out there, lurking, waiting for the next foolish soul to carve a pumpkin after midnight. If you're ever in my hometown during Halloween, remember this: don't carve pumpkins after midnight. You might just summon the pumpkin man. And trust me, you don't want to meet him. The next day went by like any other, but that night, I couldn't shake the thought of the mask I'd bought from that strange little shop. I took it out of my bag, holding it up to the light. It looked just as creepy as the first time I saw it, maybe even creepier. The eyes were dark and empty, almost as if they were staring right through me. When I touched the surface, it felt cold, like it had just been pulled from a freezer. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. After all, it was Halloween. And what was the point of having a creepy mask if I didn't use it? I slipped the mask over my head and adjusted it until it fit snugly. The latex clung to my face like a second skin. I walked over to the mirror to see how it looked. As I stared at my reflection, I noticed something strange. My image didn't seem quite right. At first, it was subtle. My movements were slightly off, almost as if there was a tiny delay. I tilted my head, but the eyes behind the mask didn't follow mine. They remained locked on me, too intense, too real. A nervous laugh escaped my lips, but when I laughed, my voice sounded different, deeper, rougher, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside me. I quickly pulled off the mask, my heart racing, and tossed it onto my bed. That should have been the end of it. I should have thrown the mask away and never looked at it again. But I didn't. I told myself I was just tired and imagining things. Maybe the mask was too tight or something silly like that. The next day was Halloween, and I was determined to wear the mask for just a couple of hours at the party my friends were throwing. I put it on right before heading out. The moment it touched my face, I felt that same cold chill run through me, but this time it was worse. My skin tingled, and a pressure built at the back of my head, like something was pushing against my thoughts. The voice from the mirror was back, my voice, but not mine. It felt like someone angry was trying to break free from within me. At the party, things got weird quickly. At first, my friends didn't notice anything odd, but I felt something changing inside me. The mask wasn't just tight, it felt like it was sinking into my skin, merging with me. My thoughts became foggy, and every time someone bumped into me or said something I didn't like, a rush of anger coursed through me, a primal urge to lash out. I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain control, but the feeling kept growing stronger. Then came the memories. I can't explain it, but as the night wore on, flashes of images that weren't mine started invading my mind. Dark alleys, blood-stained walls, a knife glinting in the light. The sensation of cold steel cutting through flesh. They struck me out of nowhere, overwhelming my senses. I'd blink, And suddenly, I was confronted with a man's face twisted in fear, his eyes wide as blood poured from his throat. I didn't know who he was, but the memory was vivid, too vivid to be my imagination. By midnight, I was no longer in control. My body moved on its own, and my mind was just along for the ride. I desperately tried to pull off the mask, but my hands wouldn't obey me. It felt as though they were no longer mine. The skin on my face felt tight, as if the mask was becoming part of me. I looked into a nearby mirror, and my reflection was no longer mine. The mask had twisted my features, merging grotesque attributes with my own. The eyes staring back at me were filled with rage, hatred, and violence. Then it struck me the mask wasn't just a mask, it was something alive, something ancient and malevolent, and it was taking over my body. Those memories didn't belong to anyone. They belonged to a killer, a serial killer who had haunted this town decades ago. The mask was his, and his spirit was trapped inside, seeking a new host, a new vessel to inhabit. Panic surged through me. I tried again to tear off the mask, clawing at it with desperate hands, but it wouldn't budge. The skin on my face burned, and the pressure in my head grew unbearable. I could feel the killer's thoughts mixing with mine, drowning me in his hatred. If I didn't get the mask off by midnight, I knew I'd be lost. He would take over, and I'd vanish into oblivion. I ran from the party, stumbling through the streets as my vision blurred and the world twisted around me. The memories were becoming more vivid, bleeding into my reality. I saw faces that weren't there and heard screams echoing in my ears. I was losing control, and the clock was ticking down to midnight. Somehow, in those last desperate moments, I managed to rip the mask off. It felt like tearing off my own skin, the pain blinding. I collapsed in the street, gasping for air, the mask lying beside me, still twisted in that awful grin. I didn't go back to the party. I didn't talk to anyone. That night, I threw the mask into the river, hoping it would sink to the bottom and never resurface. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still feel its presence, lurking in the shadows. It all began in 2016 in a small town not far from where I grew up. Halloween was always a big deal here, but that year, something different happened, something I can't explain, something that haunts me every day since. It started with an invitation, one of those that seems harmless at first. I remember it clearly, even though I wish I didn't. I was in my tiny apartment, finishing some work on my computer. It was late, and the wind outside had that unmistakable chill that comes when autumn is about to turn into winter. My phone buzzed with a notification, a text message. It wasn't from anyone I knew, which was strange. I should have ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message said, "You're invited tonight at 11 p.m. to the old Thomas house, the experience of a lifetime." There was no number, just those mysterious words. The Thomas house was famous in town, but not for good reasons. It had been abandoned for years. No one dared to touch it or even talk about it. The place was a wreck, with boarded windows and crumbling walls, the kind of place kids dared each other to sneak into. But beyond its run-down state, there were dark stories. People said a family had lived there once, but they vanished overnight. No one really knew what happened. I couldn't say no, not just me. Jake, Lucy, and Ben, my closest friends, got the same message. None of us knew who sent it, but we all thought it was some Halloween prank. That's what we told ourselves. Looking back, it feels so foolish. We thought we were in for cheap scares, fake blood, and people in costumes. We were wrong. When we arrived, the house was dead quiet. No other cars, no lights, nothing. Just the wind blowing through the broken windows. But the door was wide open. like it was waiting for us. That's when things started to feel off. We hesitated, but pushed forward. The second we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us, locking itself. Jake tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. We laughed it off at first, but the unease settled in. Inside was worse than I imagined. There was this smell, old, damp wood, and something else, something rotten. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the furniture was ancient, draped in sheets as if the owners had left in a hurry. Dust clung to everything, but it felt staged, as if someone wanted it to look that way. That's when the lights flickered on, dim yellow bulbs lighting up the narrow hallway ahead. No one said anything, we just stood there staring at the door at the end of the hall, like it was waiting for us to open it. We should have left right then. But instead, we walked deeper into the house. The first room we entered looked like a regular living room, old furniture, a fireplace, shelves filled with books and trinkets. But there was a large, old mirror on the far wall, framed in tarnished silver. As soon as we stepped in, the mirror fogged over like someone had breathed on it. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move across its surface, but no one else seemed to notice. Then the door slammed shut hard behind us. I spun around, but there was no one there. We thought we were alone, but we were wrong. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the fireplace was suddenly lit, crackling with a fire that hadn't been there just seconds before. That's when we heard a laugh. Not a deep, hearty laugh, but a quick, sharp giggle echoing from somewhere above us. Jake called out, but no one answered. Then the mirror fogged up again, and words appeared in the condensation. The game has begun. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't some cheap haunted house. This was something much more sinister. We tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the room started to change. I swear the furniture shifted, the layout twisted. The walls seemed to close in around us, and we began to feel trapped. "Lucy!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the strange new layout. She was still staring into the mirror, transfixed. Jake and Ben held her as I tried to shake her out of it. It was like she was lost somewhere else, and something had taken her. The air felt charged, thick with a presence that seemed to watch us from the corners of the room. "Lucy, come back!" Ben yelled, but she didn't respond. Her eyes went blank, staring at her reflection. "We need to get her out of here," I said, my heart racing. "Let's check upstairs," Jake suggested, and we all nodded, desperate for any chance to escape this nightmare. We moved toward the hallway where the giggling had come from, each step feeling like a leap into the unknown. As we climbed the staircase, I felt a pressure build around me, like hands were reaching out, holding me back. The air grew heavy, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Finally, we reached the top, the hallway dark and eerie. The giggling grew louder, echoing off the walls like a mocking song. At the end of the hall, we saw a door slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. We pushed it open, revealing a room filled with mirrors. Lucy stood in the center, staring at her reflection. But it wasn't her reflection, it was someone else, twisted and wild-eyed, grinning back at us. "Come play with me," the girl in the mirror said, her voice a distorted echo of Lucy's. I lunged forward to grab Lucy, but she was frozen in place, locked in a trance. The giggling became a cacophony, filling the room with a terrifying energy. The mirrors surrounded us, reflecting faces that weren't ours, darker, more twisted versions of ourselves. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Jake and Ben. We turned and fled back through the door, back down the staircase, but the house was shifting around us. Each step echoed with that chilling laughter. the feeling of being chased. When we finally burst outside, the air felt surreal. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow. For a moment, we thought we had escaped. But the house loomed behind us, dark and menacing, windows like black eyes watching us. We stood gasping, but Lucy wasn't with us. She was still inside, trapped. The darkness of the house swallowed her, and a chill ran down my spine. The following days passed in a blur. We reported Lucy missing, but the police didn't find her. They searched the house but discovered nothing, no signs of struggle, no clues, just those old mirrors. I often returned to that night, replaying every moment, every choice I made. Why didn't I see the signs? Why didn't I turn back when the door slammed shut? As Halloween approaches each year, I feel that darkness creeping back, memories of Lucy mixing with the shadows of that house. I hear laughter in the wind, always reminding me of the girl who never came back, a reminder of the evil that lurked within those walls.